Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, good morning.
Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for attending our webinar series. Welcome to the webinar series, Greening Transportation Projects. My name is Isao Endo. I am Environment Specialist at Asian Development Bank. I am happy to serve as the moderator. Transportation infrastructure projects are critical for development. However, the projects may cause serious impacts to the environment and wildlife. It is necessary to have capacity to address the negative impacts of the projects. Against this backdrop, we are organizing this webinar series as part of our capacity building activities in close cooperation with Wildlife Institute of India. The webinar series aims to promote green linear infrastructure for protecting biodiversity and ecosystems in Asia and the Pacific. The series consists of 4 webinars. Today's webinar is the first one. It focuses on the landscape connectivity and the modeling of it for habitat and wildlife conservation. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping announcements. Please note that this meeting is recorded. Please stay on mute unless you speak. Please turn off your microphone after speaking. Please use the function of raise my hand or use the chat box to raise your questions. Here's today's agenda. We have invited the experts from the Wildlife Institute of India, or WII. After the presentations, the interactive discussions between the speakers and the audience will be organized. Now, let's move on to the first agenda item. I would like to invite Ms. Karma Yangzom. Karma is the Principal Environment Specialist of ADB. She's responsible for environment safeguards review of the projects, while she serves as the focal point for greening infrastructure. Karma has led the production of the 2 ADB publications on climate-proofing transport infrastructure and greening infrastructure design for transport projects. She has, I'm afraid there's a pause popping up. Sorry about that. Karma has a master's degree in environment management from Yale University. Karma, over to you.
Thank you, Isao. Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, to be starting this webinar series. And today is the first of a series of webinars that was mentioned by Isao on the theme of greening transportation projects. And as some of you here may know, this is a topic, a subject which is very close to my heart. I have been working in the transport sector for more than 10 years, particularly in South Asia, where I got the opportunity to work on some transport projects with ecologically challenging circumstances. So I've learned a lot in those years. So today I'm very happy to be here in this webinar, and very grateful that our colleagues Isao, Victor and team from the Environment Thematic Group in ADB, together with the Transport Sector Group colleagues and with Wildlife Institute of India have put together this fantastic webinar series. And as Isao had mentioned earlier, that we need to find ways to to avoid negative impacts on nature from projects. So I think this sort of webinar series and knowledge events is very helpful in changing the narrative because linear infrastructure has accumulated a sort of a negative reputation in terms of impact on nature, and the relationship is actually known to be quite negative. However, this was in the past, and over the past couple of years, we have learned a lot. We have much more data. We have many experts in the field. We understand better the behavior of wildlife and how they behave when they interact with linear infrastructure. And we have a lot of experts such as Wildlife Institute of India, who actually are the experts in this field and have the solutions to avoiding this negative impacts from linear infrastructure on nature. So I think we really need to work on changing the narrative and trying to change it into a positive relationship. However, I think the area where we need to focus a bit more and pay more attention to is the first step of avoidance in the first place. In my personal experience, a lot of the linear infrastructure projects, by the time we come into the picture, decisions have already been made on the location of the infrastructure. And it could be in a very ecologically sensitive area. But by then, decisions have all already been made, and there is very little room for changing the location of the infrastructure. So I think that's an area where we need to do better in terms of finding ways to avoid impacts by trying to locate our infrastructure projects in areas that are less ecologically sensitive. Because by the time we have to go ahead with the project in the ecologically sensitive area, then we have to come up with mitigation measures. And it just becomes much more challenging, much more complicated, much more expensive, in fact, for the government agency that are implementing these projects. So just wanted to highlight that upfront. And also wanted to quickly refer to the recently concluded COP26. And I think one of the sort of major positive outcomes of this COP was on the recognition of nature as a cornerstone for development. And as some of you may know, there was a joint multilateral development bank statement on nature, which had been signed and announced. And ADB, along with 9 other MDBs, made this joint statement, basically committing to better integrate nature positive features in investment projects. And within ADB, we have prepared a nature positive investment roadmap, which will set out the direction for ADB's activities and provide a platform to better deliver the environmentally sustainable objective under our strategy 2030. And at the core of this work is the Regional Natural Capital Lab project, which serves as a vehicle to explore and test nature positive solutions, collect lessons and share knowledge, and act as an implementation mechanism to transform the way nature is managed in Asia and the Pacific. And then we will also have the second phase of COP15, the CBD COP, which will happen next year. So that is also something where we need to keep a close watch on, particularly with regard to the commitments that will be made by member countries. So it's all great. There are all these global level commitments, strategic level announcements that are being made. However, this really needs to translate into actions at the field level, at the ground level. If we cannot translate those objectives at the ground level, then it will not be possible to meet the objectives of those the larger goals. So that is why webinars like this one that we're having today are very, very important. And I cannot stress it enough that we really need to focus on building the capacity and raising awareness, particularly amongst our government agencies that work on the linear infrastructure projects. And I felt that this is something which is still a missing link, where usually it's mainly the people who are experts in wildlife and nature that are promoting this. But at the end of the day, the owners of the infrastructure project are the Department of Road, are the Railway Ministry, are the Agriculture Ministry for irrigation canals, the Power Department for the transmission lines. So it is the people in these departments and ministries that we need to equip with the information, the knowledge on the benefits of having nature positive features and ecologically positive features in project design. On green infrastructure in ADB, we have been promoting this agenda, and as mentioned by Isao before, that I had been working on this and we had also prepared this publication on greening infrastructure projects. However, the efforts are still very, very minimal at the moment when it comes to actual application in projects. So we need to do better. And of course, one way of getting that message across is by organizing events such as this. So I hope that this webinar series will go well, and the objectives of really conveying the information, particularly to the government officials who are involved in the infrastructure projects. I hope that information will get conveyed successfully, and I hope we actually have participants from the infrastructure departments today. So the first webinar asked this very important question on why connectivity matters and how to develop models of connectivity for different species. So I hope in the discussions today, we can try to find the answers to these questions and help us act for a common interest and intention within and outside of ADB. So with this, I would like to wish a great start to these webinar series, and I look forward to hearing the presentation and the discussions today and taking part in the discussions in the later part of the webinar. Thank you very much. Over to you, Isao.
Thank you, Karma, so much for your excellent remarks based on your rich experience in a green linear infrastructure. Also, your information about ADB's recent activities, including nature positive investments, as well as the Nature Capital Lab to promote green linear infrastructure design. It's really encouraging. Thank you so much. Moving on, let me invite Dr. Bilal Habib for introducing the background and objectives of this webinar. Dr. Habib is the head of Animal Ecology and Conservation Biology at the Wildlife Institute of India. He's a conservation biologist working on the integration of quantitative and interdisciplinary approaches to conservation challenges. Dr. Habib is trying to integrate science-based solutions to developmental activities, especially linear infrastructure. Over to you, Bilal.
Thank you, Isao. Thank you so much for your introduction. Yes, with the help of ADB, we have tried to organize this webinar series, which is going to be from November 21 to February 22. As you know that most of us are aware of the threats to biodiversity and natural resources from the development of transportation infrastructure. Linear infrastructural projects for developing roads, highways, and railways that boost economic growth depend on considerable inputs of national capital and invariably involve long-term investments. These projects also have the potential to cause severe impacts to the very natural capital that sustains economic development. Habitat loss, fragmentation, and ecosystem degradation not only causes declines in biodiversity, but also results in increased contact and conflict between wildlife species, people with far-reaching consequences, including possible spillover of the diseases. We know that the most of the developing countries are at a dilemma where the challenge is to either go for a development or to go for the conservation. There are so many developed countries in this world. So can we stop these developing countries who aspire to reach there by telling them that you can't make these roads? The infrastructure is not good for you because we have done the wrong, you don't do the wrong. Probably not. So the need of the day is to think, to visualize how we can have a conservation and a development going on hand by hand. Yes, there's a cost to the development and there's a cost to the nature. We all have to try to be on the same page to mitigate it in such a way that both the infrastructure development, which is the backbone of any developing economy, it's not only about the transportation of the people, it's about the exchange of ideas, it's about the exchange of culture, it's about the flow of information from one system, it's about how cultures move. We have to think about all these processes, which is the backbone of any developing society. Yes, there's a cost, and we have to try to bear this cost. At Wildlife Institute of India, what we try to do, we try to use science to build up a system where we can guide these infrastructure agencies to develop mitigation measures which are effective, which are useful for the species which are in Asia and which are in India, especially in India and other regional countries. Yes, it's just the beginning. We have a long way to go to generate that particular information. I think by doing such webinars, we'll be able to disseminate the information which we have generated, and we also try to assimilate the information what people have generated in other parts of the world, so that together we can have a better world, not only for us, but for the species who share the landscape with us. So this, with the objective, the main goal of the webinar series, which we have planned with ADB, is to broaden and deepen the understanding of the principles of green growth and concepts of smart planning into transport infrastructure development. Build a capacity to promote ecologically friendly and sustainable road and rail development projects in Asia. These training programs also aim to build a capacity for conserving and managing natural capital during planning and implementation of transportation projects in South Asia. The training programs are oriented in building capacity of individuals and organizations working in the implementation of green linear infrastructure projects in transportation sector in Southeast Asia. So what we hope at the end of the day, what participants can learn from this particular workshops is the impact of the linear infrastructure on animals and context-specific mitigation measures, importance of natural capital and ecosystem services in planning and implementation of transportation projects, promotion of sustainable development and conservation in connected habitats, green infrastructure principles by combining conservation and smart development projects. The focus of today's talk is why connectivity is important, why we need connectivity models for different species, because ecologically, we know that different species have a different capabilities to navigate the eroded landscapes. So we may think of one species and try to build a mitigation measure at one place, but probably those mitigation measures may not be appropriate for the other species. So when we talk about a multi-species mitigation measures, the first step is to know multi-species corridors. So in today's webinar, probably we will try to discuss about what are the different aspects which we need to understand while trying to develop multi-species connectivity models. I hope this will help us in designing better landscape level mitigation plans for linear infrastructure. Thank you very much. And I really visualize that we will have a very strong interactive session to highlight, to take the learnings from this particular webinar forward. Thank you, Isao.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Habib, for your introduction. The context and the objective of this webinar series is really clearly presented and defined. And I appreciate your emphasis on the importance of balancing the conservation and development, as well as the role of science into this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to invite Dr. Indranil Mondal for his presentation. Dr. Mondal is the project scientist at the Wildlife Institute of India. He's a landscape ecologist and wildlife connectivity expert. He's studying how linear infrastructure dissects wildlife habitats and corridors. Using GIS, Dr. Mondal plans wildlife crossing structures to mitigate the negative effects of roads on wildlife movement. Based on his research, Dr. Mondal provides managers and policymakers with tools to tackle conservation problems in central India and beyond. Now, Indranil, over to you.
Thank you, Isao, so much for the introduction, and it is really a pleasure talking to this gathering. 20 minutes is really a short time to cover such a vast topic, I would say, where I have to touch on the concepts and also show people how to actually undertake the analysis so that we can model connectivity. It is the matter of a whole workshop that we have to conduct, but I'll do my best and touch on all the points that should be spoken upon. Fragmentation is a process which has been shown in the animation here, where you see an intact piece of natural habitat is being fragmented by different kinds of developmental activities, mostly anthropogenic. So if we go by definition, forest fragmentation is the process of dividing large tracts of forest into smaller isolated tracts surrounded by human modified environments. And also, if you talk about habitat fragmentation, it is defined as the process of dissecting large and contiguous areas of similar native vegetation into smaller types of differently typed vegetation by intensive human activity. And fragmentation has a lot of effects on ecosystems. Fragmentation of landscape leads to fragmented habitats, and fragmentation can lead to about 80% of mammal, reptile, and bird species being affected. 80% of them are affected by fragmentation. And it has also been cited as the primary cause of rapid species extinction and the loss of native species. Coming from fragmentation, it leads to the concept of landscape connectivity, where it is the need of the hour, and it is the property of a landscape arising from the interaction between an animal movement and landscape structure. Landscape connectivity are of two types, structural and functional, where structural connectivity talks about physical connectedness of different suitable forest habitats through a sea of different land use types, which we call the matrix. And functional connectivity talks about such habitats, such connecting habitats being actually used by animals. So it leads to the actual ecological flows in the form of movement of plants or animals, energy, or nutrients. But then again, we have to keep in mind that the landscape connectivity is process and scale dependent. It is dependent on scale. If you look at the home range size and the ranging pattern of a large individual species like the coyote here, and at the same time, you look at this species, you see there's so much of difference. And this is where multiple species considerations of landscape connectivity come in, where there are huge disparities of ranging pattern and home range size. This also gives you an example where you see that edge-sensitive species might not move from one habitat type to the other, whereas there are other species for whom it may be easier to navigate changes in habitat, which may lead, which may result from fragmentation. Now, wild animals need their landscape to be connected for individual movement, for migration. We know the famous wildebeest migration. Then they also need gene flow, also other kinds of ecological flows like disturbance, as Dr. Habib was talking about, where it can also lead to transmission of disease and all, prey-predator interaction, and also seed dispersal. And also there are these movement by animal populations to avoid disasters like floods. So now fragmentation forms a stressor on the requirements of habitat connectivity, where it implies negative effects on this, which can lead to habitat effects, it can lead to alienation, and also direct mortality of animals. And when direct mortality of animals is talked about, it leads from individual level effects to population level impacts, and which then leads to changes in biodiversity of the whole and ecosystem services of the whole region. The IUCN Connectivity Specialist Group defines ecological corridor as a clearly defined geographical space, not recognized as a protected area or other effective area-based conservation measure. It is governed and managed over long term to conserve or restore effective ecological connectivity with associated ecosystem services and cultural and spiritual values. But having said all that, why should we care? Because keeping habitats connected, keeping natural habitats connected is a key conservation strategy which is being taken all over the world, and connected habitats ensured undisrupted ecological flows, whether they are flows of energy, whether they are flow of nutrient or the water cycle. And intact ecological flows ensure a stable climate where we do not have extremes of temperature, we do not have a lot of wildfire events happening or floods. It ensures water in our rivers, which helps us in agriculture and irrigating our agricultural fields, provides water for our cities, and also it provides a better soil, which improves again agriculture, and better air quality, which we see worsening all over the cities in the world. Now, the effects of roads on wild populations has escalating effect where it starts from mortality of individuals, as I just mentioned in a couple of slides earlier, to barrier effect, and slowly reaches a regional population level effects. And how these effects are happening is outlined in this table that I've taken from UNEP document, which shows that roads, railway lines, and fencing have negative effects through habitat fragmentation, alteration of animal behavior, especially their migration patterns, barrier for movement again here, altering the use of the habitat, and also some of them, especially roads, leads to increased human presence where settlements grow up around roads. Now, how do we mitigate the effects of area infrastructure? So here, the best possible way, the priority we should give, as Rakama was also saying, is to avoid the potential impacts. But then the right next to that is to minimize, because a lot of times due to developmental imperatives, or maybe sometimes also due to political pressure, it becomes difficult for also due to cost considerations. It is difficult to avoid very necessary linear development projects sometimes. So we'll see what options to take. And such strategic measures can be structural or non-structural. Structural, where animal behaviors are altered through viaducts, ropeways, culverts, and passes, where we channel animal movement through an area through which they will not be harmed. So that is structural. And through non-structural, where we alter human behavior through different policies. Today, I'll give you an example of the second way here, which is to minimize, where to decrease the spatial or temporal scale of the impact during design and construction. This is an example of an expressway that is under construction in the state of Maharashtra in central India. This highway is 701 kilometers long. Although it does not cut through any protected area, but it passes through a lot of sensitive wildlife habitats. So the most unique part of working with these people was that here considerations of wildlife habitat connectivity was imbibed into the project from the very beginning, right from the planning phase. And here, just because of that, we were able to move ahead without major disturbance to the wildlife habitats here. So the process that we followed here was that early integration of these concerns during the budgeting phase of the whole project, also during the planning phase, where they had already a couple of wildlife structures which they had already planned in their documents. Following that, we went to the identification of go and no go zones, because the whole area, most of it was agriculture. So there was no point in making them wait for us to do our surveys and to tell them where to come up with the mitigation measures. So following this particular methodology, which I will be explaining, we were able to give them a go ahead in areas which were not wildlife sensitive, and then later give them prescriptions for areas where there was presence of wildlife. This was followed by field surveys to look for wildlife presence, data analysis, and final prescription of mitigation measures. And to follow that, what we did is monitoring. So right now there is construction going on, and we are doing during construction work monitoring, where we are looking at disturbance that may be created due to the construction activity. We are monitoring them. We are also looking at if the dimensions of the wildlife mitigation measures that have been prescribed, whether they are adhering to it. And after the construction is complete and the highway is operational, we'll move towards post-construction monitoring to see whether these prescriptions of these wildlife mitigation measures that have been provided are ultimately effective. Because this is one of its kind project in our country, and the whole community here of the transportation sector is learning. So I think this is a very good example, and monitoring, post-construction monitoring is going to provide us many insights. So the second stage here was accomplished by using remotely sensed indicators for prioritizing segments for assessment and mitigation, where we looked at presence of protected areas or eco-sensitive zones, tiger habitat, presence of key species, and priority habitats also here, and also areas with high endemism plants and lower taxa. Through a hierarchical analysis here, we could identify areas that were important to conserve. This was also accompanied by a reconnaissance survey, where we did collected data on habitat to verify our findings that we did through GIS and remote sensing. We also consulted the road building agency. There was numerous to and fro consultations between the Wildlife Institute of India and the road building agency. And that led to the identification of wildlife focus areas. So out of 701 kilometers, we identified 117 kilometers which were sensitive for wildlife. And we did further detailed surveys at those places. The detailed surveys led us to these intensity maps of animal use. And this came out from data that we have collected in field, animal presence data. And therefore, mitigation measures were suggested based on species, sign density, surrounding habitat, topography, land use and land cover, and anthropogenic interference. So in this whole project, there are around 1,797 crossing structures, out of which these are the wildlife specific structures that were prescribed by our study. but there are other structures also which we feel are wildlife friendly and can still be used by wildlife as crossing structures. This is one example. The next example that I'll move on to, and this also follows the second step where we are trying to mitigate the effects where we could not avoid it, is the four laning. That is an extension of a National Highway 44, which was previously National Highway 7, in again the central Indian landscape, but at a different place than this, and it is in a much smaller section where it is cutting between the wildlife corridor of two protected areas. So we surveyed these areas again for animal signs, and we found crossing areas across this proposed expansion of the highway. This gives you a better view of the areas that we highlighted as being where the density of animal signs were high. Here you see the wildlife underpasses being constructed according to our prescriptions. And this is the largest wildlife underpass in India, if not the world. And this is operational right now. And there are monitoring programs also going on, which proves animal movement below these structures, including large carnivores and ungulates, and also canids, pack-living animals. And this provides us a successful example from where India can learn a lot. So I believe by smartly integrating wildlife conservation concerns into different sectors, like linear infrastructure development, for that example, can give us a lot of benefits. And through intelligent formulation of policies where we try and combine these two sectors, I think we can strike a balance between conservation and development, and they don't have to go head to head. Now coming to the second section, which is about the method that we followed to model connectivity. I will touch on the concepts here, won't go into a lot of detail, and I'll open the whole thing for discussion. So it's steps to approach to connectivity analysis. The first step that we should take is data selection, because it is any exercise of wildlife connectivity modeling that you undertake is very species or process dependent. As for example, like I showed in earlier slides, where there are two different body species with different body sizes, with different ranging patterns. So the scale of that study will be different. That would also influence in turn what habitat covariates you select. That then translates to the data that we download, remotely sensed data. It can be primary field data like color data of animals, tracking data, or it can be open access data that is available from the internet. Then it leads to model parameterization, where we give different values to these layers. It can be empirical or it can be based on expert opinion. And then we finally make a cost surface, which is the cost of the animal traversing a particular piece of land between two protected areas. And finally, that leads to the connectivity modeling, where we use the cost surface and find the least cost pathway between two protected areas. So one example is this tiger corridors of Vidarbha landscape in central India, where we use tiger presence data as a species data and also tiger tracking data. And the habitat covariates that we used was vegetation, disturbance data like distance from roads, presence of livestock, the terrain data, precipitation data, distance from forest, protected areas, and also temperature data. And we use the Maxent model, which is the maximum entropy model, to derive a model of habitat suitability, or basically it is a proxy for habitat permeability, which gives us the cost of moving in the landscape. And that was used through circuit theory to arrive at a corridor model. In circuit theory, these habitats are considered as nodes. The connectivity is in the form of linear edges, and the resistance is the resistance that a landscape provides to the movement of an animal. And when we look at the current values are basically movement of an animal. So landscape looks like this, as denoted in this diagram, where low resistance areas are the protected areas, and the intervening matrix has different values. This is the tiger corridor map that we generated from all that analysis, and it is being widely used in this whole landscape to prescribe mitigation measures on all the road structures that you see going through this road. And this is a document which is used for policy making and by all government agencies. Moving to a finer resolution study, we have this example of tricarinate hill turtle, which is a very small species. And I know I'm running out of time, I'll just hasten up a bit. So this is a very small species, and data for this species was collected very fine scale at 0.5 meter resolution satellite imagery. Roads here were mapped by hand, where we went around with GPS units. Resource like food plants were mapped one by one for this case. And this is the campus of the Wildlife Institute of India. So this is the mapping of the habitat. We mapped roads and each and every bush of berries that it eats. We mapped the elevation. And this is where we used not an empirical model, but an expert opinion, where we gave different values of conductance or the cost of movement to each land cover or each kind of resource. And we followed SETI's analytical hierarchy process to combine these layers that came to the cost surface. And this is the connectivity model for this small ranging species. I know the end is sudden, but I think that gives us a lot of scope for discussion. I would like to thank the head of our organization, National Tiger Conservation Authority, Maharashtra Road Development Corporation, the Forest Department for their funding, and Asian Development Bank for giving me this opportunity to present today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your great presentation, Indranil. That's really appreciated. I would like to pose some questions to you. We have already received good questions, actually several questions already. One of them is from Nidia Goyal. Oh, but by the way, this is supposed to be the interactive session. Nidhi, do you mind, you have a question about strategically located stepping stones that can increase dispersal success. Would you like to jump in and pose your question directly to Indranil?
Yes, Nidhi. You are right that in today's world, where it is where our wild natural habitats are like small islands in a sea of human use landscapes, it is very difficult to even conserve these linear tracts of corridors. So in that case, also you must have seen in our studies, we have done studies like that where we have identified these stepping stone corridors, which are these small remnant patches of forest embedded in the matrix that are being used extensively for large carnivores and species alike for moving from one habitat to the other. So yes, you are right that stepping stone corridors are really important.
They are for all the species, means they will do the same, means for larger carnivores and small species as well.
Come again, please.
My question is, they are stepping stones are good. So my question is, they are good for all types of wildlife species, not only for large carnivores, for small mesocarnivores and for small species as well.
Yes, they are also. But it depends on how far they are placed. Even the dispersal distance is small, then it becomes, and if your stepping stone corridor, if it's there, but if it's too far, maybe it is attainable for a tiger, or maybe it may not be attainable for a smaller ranging species who may not move out that far and treat it as a stepping stone.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nidhi, and also Indranil. There's another question from Akansha Sakshana. Actually, in fact, you raised two questions. One is about the connectivity models for communities. Also, the second question is a kind of follow-up. Akansha, would you like to join the conversation and have a discussion with Indranil directly?
Yeah, so I think that that is really cool. I mean, if we could do that, that will solve a lot of problems, because we can cover a wide swath of species here if we do a community approach. We haven't tried that yet in India, but I think it is important. So the tiger approach here gives us an umbrella species approach, where similar ranging carnivores and mesocarnivores and prey species are covered, but then smaller body-sized animals may be left alone in that. In that case, if we do a community-based modeling, I think that will be helpful then. Then less species will be left out from this analysis.
Akansha, are you happy with the feedback? Okay. Good. Thank you, Indranil. There's another question which I would like to accommodate from Donald Sinclair. He's asking, how could road transportation assets be improved or designed to give habitat for biodiversity?
So Isa, I will just pitch in to answer this particular question. We have a different types of biodiversity. Okay, probably when you go close to a sea, you'll see a lot of birds perching on these electric poles, right? And yes, in a countries where human density is very less, and there are types of birds which are very adapted to such type of infrastructure, and they use probably in such areas it makes a logical sense. But when we talk about the transportation and biodiversity conservation, we are talking about the wilderness areas. There the species are not used to this type of infrastructure. So if we bring these birds closer to the roads, that may have other impacts, that we, especially in areas where the amount of traffic on these roads is very high. Like if you compare a highway in India and you compare a highway in Spain, there is a 50% difference in the amount of traffic we have on Indian highways than a highway in Spain. So I think if we bring animals, if we make roadsides or road habitats more suitable for species, with a less traffic is going to be fine. But as the traffic is going to increase more and more, this is going to be more problem for the wildlife. I think we have to be very cautious and very sensible when we have to think about where we are. It pertains to where we are, about which species we are thinking about, and then think to develop that type of infrastructure.
Great, thank you so much, Bilal, for your inputs. That's really helpful. I'm afraid it's 4:50 p.m. Manila time already, and Dr. Mathur has to go before 5. So I'm so sorry, but I need to conclude this question and discussion session. While we receive a lot of good questions, maybe we can take a look at those questions later and then respond if possible and as necessary. I would suggest that we have the closing remarks, inviting Dr. Mathur. However, I would also ask for your time, Bilal and Indranil, if possible, for another 10 minutes after the closing remarks, so that we can kind of accommodate extra questions.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Mathur for his closing remarks. Dr. Mathur is the chairperson of National Biodiversity Authority, India. Prior to this, he served as the director of the Wildlife Institute of India. Currently, Dr. Mathur is also serving as the regional vice chair of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas and a member of the International Association of Impact Assessment. He has more than 30 years of experience in contributing to a wide range of training, research, and academic programs in the field of biodiversity conservation. Actually, he has been contributing so many global initiatives, including UN, IPBES, CBD, and UNESCO. Dr. Mathur, it's really great for us to have you. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here. I would appreciate your closing remarks. Over to you, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Isao, for your great understanding. As I said, I am too pressed for time. I have to run to the airport in a few minutes from now. But nevertheless, a very good afternoon and good evening to all ladies and gentlemen, and all my friends and colleagues, students, researchers, faculty, everyone part of this webinar. At the outset, I would like to compliment the combined and competent teams of the Asian Development Bank and the Wildlife Institute of India for having conceived of this webinar series, largely dealing with natural capital and the smart green infrastructure. Although my young colleague, Dr. Bilal, has provided a detailed background and objectives of the launch of the webinar series a little while, I feel that it's a very nostalgic moment for me, and I will spend a few more moments into this 2-decade-old journey encompassing the linear infrastructure development, the integration of principles of green growth, and the merging of the concepts of smart design and planning into linear developments. I would also be candid enough to say that 23 years ago, when we proposed the research project on wildlife and green infrastructure development in the Wildlife Institute of India, Bilal, this is 23 years ago, you were not there, but we did not get a support to even start that project. So much water has flown down the river, and thanks to the sustained efforts by my colleague, Dr. Asha Rajvanshi, who would also be speaking in this webinar series to come in the few days, that emerging disciplines of road ecology, of rail ecology, that made the beginning in the global north have now become an integral part of the SGI dialogues that we are launching today in the form of webinar series. And to my young colleagues and Bilal in particular, as I speak now, kindly note that the Prime Minister of our country is inaugurating the international airport at Jewar in Uttar Pradesh. And to all my friends, this siting of this airport had some wildlife issues, but not major ones. It is being sited in a largely agriculture land. But the good part is that the project proponents approached Wildlife Institute of India, and they said that even if the wildlife is not spectacular, even if we are talking of a deer or an antelope species like nilgai, or a few crane and bird species, we still want to tell to the world that India cares for its nature. So this is a very big day today. And I checked up my notes that today, and that was, as you know, Bilal, the last of my signing at WII. And of course, I was not part since then. But the point I'm making that this issue of smart green infrastructure is now taking its due place, which started 23 years back, but it is now that it is giving us results and fruits. And obviously in this long journey, World Bank experts, particularly Dr. Anupam Joshi and Dr. Neha Vyas, and ADB experts, Dr. Bruce, Dr. Karma, and Dr. Isao, have made a very significant contribution of taking the disciplines of road ecology and rail ecology in India. Undoubtedly, the very valuable and professional support from the senior officials of our ministry, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, and the National Highway Authority of India have enabled us to move ahead on this trajectory of excellence in this area of green growth and green economy. And in its development, we as biologists, as wildlife biologists, have to play a very significant role. Although I would like to speak on many issues relevant to this webinar series, but I will use that opportunity when I get a time to speak in my session. I would like to flag three very important thematic areas which need our attention. And I call them 3 C's. The first C is for capacity building. And this step is how from you of starting a series dealing with SGI is a step in right direction. We also need the second C for communication, because very often we are only talking to ourselves. We need to reach out to people. And the very fact that this project and WII has also engaged a communication specialist in Sarmishta is a very important recognition that communications are important. We don't do it all the time for our conservation projects, but this project is different, and I'm so happy to have a feeling. And the third C for me is the C for convergence. See, we may work in silos, we may work in isolation, but they may not give us the results that we want. So this convergence today, at the top, the ADB WII, partners in other agencies, support from various government agencies, the highway and the forest and the rail and the road departments is also very, very crucial. So I want to address to my young biologists that they should not feel that they are providing an insignificant support. In fact, it is because of wildlife biologists, it is because of wildlife science, it is because of people like Akansha and others who have played a very significant role in generating the scientific evidence, the scientific information through camera trapping and through remote sensing and through other means, that we are now in a much better position. I want to take this opportunity to request both ADB and our colleagues in the World Bank to continue to mobilize resources, both technical and financial, to enable us to move on this challenging path. Smart design and smart planning, as you know, are both needed for moving ahead on this challenging path of SGI, also called as the smart green infrastructure. And lastly, I want to take this narrative. Karma mentioned about the way in which the conventional biological diversity is involved and dialogues are taking place on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Many of us are part over there. The goals are being set. The indicators are being set. And I see it as a great opportunity that we need to ensure that indicators on SGI and Indranil on connectivity conservation, on mobilizing resources, they become an integral part of the global monitoring framework. Only if and when it happens, we would be able to institutionalize the process, which I just said started 3 years ago. We have made rapid strides, but we still have a long way to go. I'm very confident that the young and competent team of biologists at WII, with the support of their senior management, with ADB and World Bank chipping in, along with the growing network of committed professionals, SGI will move ahead and our journey will become smoother and better, and India would be recognized as a global leader in SGI planning and development. So this is what is my final punchline today. As I said, I will use more opportunities, Karma and Esau and colleagues at WII, but this particular project of ADB is very dear to all of us. And despite all the hiccups, we are still together as part of the team. And therefore, seeing Karma today and Esau today on the screen was a very welcome sign for me. And I hope that we continue to build upon this relationship in years to come. Thank you once again for providing this opportunity. I hand it back to you, Esau. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Matua. Thank you so much for delivering such a wonderful remarks in your very busy schedule. Thank you so much. Your remarks are powerful as always, and that really encourages us to make more efforts and best efforts. And we fully noted 3 C's as keywords and guidance for us to moving forward. Thank you so much. Now, we are about to close this meeting. It's 5 p.m. Manila time. As I suggested, after this meeting, if the time allows for Bilal and Indranil, I would like to have an extra session just for 10 minutes to accommodate additional questions and interactions with the audience if they can stay with us for additional time. Before that, I have 2 small things. One is about the poll for today's webinar. We would like to know your evaluation about today's webinar. So we will just use a quick poll online. I hope, can we show that poll now? And please provide your inputs if you don't mind. So in the meantime, I would like to just inform you about our second webinar. So after this first webinar, we are organizing the second webinar in December. The date and time tentatively scheduled. It's on December 16th, 2021, starting at 11 a.m. Manila time. This second webinar is going to discuss specific aspects of the planning and mitigation measures. We also talk about capacity building needs for effective conservation measures and approaches. The latest information will be provided through our website event page. We will make sure to send you the link to that website so that you can update yourself with the latest information about the second webinar as well as the remaining webinars. That's all for now. If you have not completed the poll, please do so. If you have done, thank you very much. And I would like to conclude this meeting. Thank you again all for attending. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and I hope to see you again in the next webinar. Thank you and goodbye. So with that, officially I concluded the meeting, but Bilal and Indranil, would it be okay to have a quick, just a little discussion session, because we have a lot of good questions from the floor. So one of them is that I just noticed that we have a question from
So it will be great if the people who have asked questions, they start interacting, then we just reading questions. Please request them if they can interact. It will be really great.
Definitely. I love that. I really like that idea. Van Nguyen Duo Gong, would you gave us a question, and I understand that Duncan also kindly responded to that. And also, Dr. Asha, if you are still with us, thank you for responding to the comments. If you have any additional comments or suggestions, please share. So, Fan Nguyen Do Nok, and I see Dr. Asha as well. It's nice to see you again, Dr. Asha. Thank you for.
Hi. Thank you, Sao. Oh well, I'm glad that I attended this, and I'm very happy with the deliberations. And all of these will go together to see one fine day that we can talk about transport ecology as a subject for providing us the best solutions for conservation. I just highlighted this comment by saying that a focus should not be restricted just to species which, like tiger or other carnivores, of course, they are important, very important, and they get impacted. But there are a range of other species. From the research that we did earlier, we realized that the maximum number of species that were hit were largely birds and reptiles. So we need to continue to think and brainstorm as to what kind of solutions we can offer to them for their connectivity. Then we also have a lot of terrestrial systems where species dominate the arboreal structure or the arboreal layer of the forest or any ecosystem. So we need to look at those aspects also. It was just a comment, and I'm very, very sure that my comments are taken in a positive way. And Bilal, of course, is an expert. He has a good team, and we can start thinking in these directions also to incorporate this as a part of a larger framework of looking at what connectivity can mean for different species other than the carnivores. Thank you.
Yes, definitely, madam. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see you and Mathusa both to be part of this webinar. Yes, your comment is really valid. It's just the beginning. It started with the tiger. People have taken it to the many species, but there's a long way to go. Yes, together, and with a lot of other people, we can think of going ahead and not only talking about carnivores, not only talking about birds, but talking about all those species who are landscape dependent and who need to go from one place to other place, and think of connectivity models and connectivity for all those species. It's really great.
Yeah, and species which command importance because they occupy specialized habitats.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Bilal. It was great being here.
Thank you so much, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Asha. Thank you, Bilal, for your interaction. Now, do we still have Godfrey Oka, who gave us a question, question for Indranil. Possible to provide a rough idea of the cost of developing a connectivity model?
If data is available or data is to be generated.
Okay, that my answer would be it would highly depend on whether the data is available. Data as in if we want species data from tracking, if we want to put radio collars or radio tags on the species to collect movement data, then that is a different affair. That is, the costs are escalated a lot. But if we have the data available, if we are just looking at expertise, if we are just looking at hardware and software, then the tiger connectivity analysis that you saw, something where we did not use tracking data. There was this earlier version, which was accomplished in about $20,000 US. That is for the analysis part, where we did the study. Implementation costs are out of the scope of that. But then if we have to collect the data, if you have to put radio collars around animal individuals, then that has extra cost implications.
Just
Thank you.
just to add, yes, there are different types of models. There are different types of ways by which we model connectivity, and it depends upon what type of connectivity is to be modeled. So if you tell me we can do the structural connectivity, which says that the two areas are connected by a forest, it's not going to take much resources. But if you have to take functional connectivity, whether the species is actually using those connectivity corridors, then you need to have a species presence data. So if there's a data available, then as Indranil said, it's not much cost. But if you have to generate data for the species, then you need a lot of money to generate that particular information for that particular species. And it is a site specific, it depends upon a species. For a species like turtles or something, you may use very easy technology. For an animals like elephants, tigers, cheetahs, zebras, you may have to use the sophisticated technologies to generate that particular data. So it's a context specific, it depends upon the landscape, species, and the objectives of the modeling.
Just to give you a funny example, I mean, there you saw the connectivity model that was for the small turtle species. We may not even have spent $500 for this.
Interesting. Great. Thank you so much. Godfrey, Olka, are you happy with the feedback from the experts? If you have any additional points, please.
So you are not audible.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. The rest of us didn't hear.
Maybe not. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Indranil and Bilal, for your response. And I'm asking Godfrey Orca if he or she is happy about the feedback. If you have any additional points to these two experts, please feel free to jump in anytime. Bilal, Indranil, I'm about to close. It's 5:15 already. So I'm afraid we need to conclude this session. Maybe I can pose one last question from Shant Janawali. Shant, if you don't mind, please jump in anytime. He or she says, can you please shed light on the level of political will and commitments for wildlife-friendly large linear infrastructure in Asian countries? Most of the government agencies express their concerns due to added cost.
This is one of the most important questions and the concerns. Okay, because as I told that most of the countries, we are developing countries. Okay, can we afford to have mitigation measures at an extended cost? Yes, there was a lot of resistance. It took us almost 20 years, what Dr. Mathur explained. It took us almost 24 years to reach to this particular stage where the politicians, the decision makers have accepted it. Yes, it's an important, right? Because we can't afford to lose the things. We can delay our development. Probably if we aspire to become a developer nation in 2020 or 2022 or 24, we can delay it by 2 years, but we can't afford to lose tigers, elephants, the smaller amphibians and reptiles, or the smaller species which are invisible to us. But the most important part is the concerns of the mitigation measures should be at the planning phase of the project. Then it becomes very easy for planners, for these development agencies to garner funds for it. If we come later, once they have conceptualized their projects, where they have already money in hand, and if we come at that time and then ask them, you have to do the mitigation measures, this is the additional cost which you have to bear, then it becomes a little bit difficult. But if this process is involved at the beginning, when we are conceptualizing that particular linear infrastructure, then it becomes much more easy for those agencies. And I think now a large number of funding agencies like ADB, whether it will be the other funding agencies which give loans to the government for developing those infrastructures, they also ask nowadays, does your linear project pass through a sensitive habitat? If your projects go through the sensitive habitat, do you have a mitigation plan? And in India, the government, the federal government of India puts this guideline, puts this condition to every project that if your project is through sensitive habitat, you have to have a passage plan for animals. Without your passage plan, your project can't be implemented. It feels to me, it's very easy, but I think Dr. Asha and Dr. Mathur will tell you how difficult it was, because it took us 25 years to reach here. That's why it's very easy now. But yes, it's a hard work. It takes time, but it is also on us that when we are suggesting that what we need, that's the most critical part of it.
Thank you, Bilal. And I really admire a lot of efforts you made in this field of practice and science. And I noted the importance of the planning stage. Indranil, final word from you. May I invite?
Yeah, it was, I think, really an enriching experience here. Being on the same platform with Dr. Mathur and Asha, and also I'm listening to everybody's viewpoints here. And I think this is also a time when not just about saving habitats that these people are considering during, during planning these linear infrastructure, but also people have started talking about connectivity conservation here. They are not just looking at the local presence of a patch of forest or the local presence of a species there, but they are looking at if even that particular land linear infrastructure is connects maybe two habitats which are far away. So that is, I think, a really important era that we have moved into, where such a consideration is being taken into account. And I am very happy and grateful that with my expertise, I'm able to contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indranil, for your great effort and remarks, final comments. That's really appreciated. Once again, Bilal, Indranil, Shamista, and everyone else from the WII for your great collaboration with us and support. Thank you so much. I need to conclude this meeting now, and I hope we can see you again next month for the second webinar. Thank you. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.